And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson. It's Thursday. We're recording a big old bag of mail, and we appreciate all of you who have submitted questions. Remember, there's lots of different ways to get your questions into the mailbag. You can start by leaving us a 5-star rating, a review, and then in that review, include your question for the mailbag. We'll be pulling a couple from there. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at Cover3 Podcast. We do solicit questions on Twitter as well, and that'll be another good place to get to us, especially in some of the days leading up to the mailbag. So always follow on Twitter, leave us a review, leave us your question in the mailbag, and we can add it to the big old bag of mail. It's been a breaking news Thursday morning throughout the football world, a hire that really shakes the landscape of the sport. Barton Simmons to Vanderbilt is official. It has been announced. The general manager, director of player personnel, savant, tan suit extraordinaire. They got a graphic. Barton even got a little signature graphic. You know, they uploaded his signature. We will actually hear from Barton Simmons. We got a chance to circle up with him along with Danny Cannell a little bit ago, but we were on an embargo from the Commodores who kept us from releasing that content to you. So we will hear from him a little bit later on in the show. But Tom, that's the biggest hire news, right? I mean, you put out a poll on Twitter. Another coach got hired somewhere. I forgot where, but this is the biggest news of the day, right?
Yeah, I mean, going from like keeping the riffraff out of Toad's place to the general manager of Vanderbilt football, it's pretty good. It's pretty good, career path for our guy there.
Good for you to remember Toad's place as where he was a bouncer, because
who could forget Toad's place? I mean, it's where Slayer or somebody played.
Yeah, no, there is a mailbag. If you want to go back and listen to it, it's and it's titled "The Time That Barton Was a Bouncer for a Slayer Concert." It's one of the most epic stories he ever gave. It was this. That's what off-season mailbags are really for. But yeah, our congrats to Barton. How are the results going on your poll that you put up?
Well, the poll was what's the bigger hire? Vanderbilt hiring Barton Simmons as GM or Jacksonville hiring Urban Meyer. And right now, I don't know, some guy, Barton Simmons is winning that 56% to 44% over 700 votes, and still 23 hours left to vote. So depending on when you're listening to this, make sure you go to my Twitter account at Tom Fornelli and let your voice be heard.
That's right. More than a vote. It's a statement for football. All right. Urban Meyer to the Jacksonville Jaguars. It is not specifically a college move. We don't have an emergency podcast threshold that says, oh my gosh, a team just lost Urban Meyer. A team just got Urban Meyer. He goes from Fox Sports to now being the head coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the number 1 overall pick. We've got Trevor Lawrence coming in. There is there's like the Urban Meyer. Do you think this will be successful? There is the Urban Meyer fascination for me in terms of someone with no professional experience, and the way that the last 10 to 12 years have played out in Urban Meyer's career are just fascinating. To take that individual, somebody who has proven to even like elevate himself. He shows up at Ohio State and he takes the gentlemanly, I'm not going to recruit your guys, and throws it out the window. He brings that ruthless, relentless, killer instinct on the recruiting trail to the Big Ten. In my eyes, really changing the Big Ten landscape, sort of pushing the pace, setting the bar a little bit higher. Then, of course, near the end of his tenure, a lot of the controversy with the way that he, my words, sort of maybe helped mentor and guide and protect Zach Smith in ways that were scandalous, that really brought a lot on him, and included a 3-game suspension for Urban Meyer during that last season where Ryan Day actually started his head coaching career. I mean, so what's starting to come to mind? There's like a flood. There's a lot of different strings to this, and we don't have a specific question, but we do have one related that we're going to get to in a little bit. But I wanted to get your reaction to Urban Meyer.
Obviously, I think that from all reports, he was who the Jaguars wanted. So it's one of those weird things, because that Urban Meyer is a good football coach. It's just you don't know, because we've seen it so many times where really good football coaches leave the college level, go to the NFL level, and that it falls flat on their face, because it's like college. There's different things that you have to do, but there's a lot more involved than just understanding football, like from top to bottom in an organization and in a college program. There's a lot of things that go into it. And it's not like at Jacksonville, he can just go to the players' homes and recruit them to come play for Jacksonville. You know what I mean? You have to get them through a draft. Free agency, maybe you could kind of make those same kind of connections. But so I think it's a very interesting hire, and I think it's a good hire, but I have absolutely no idea if it's going to work out. We never really do. I think as far as a college football fan, it sucks because, to be blunt, I really enjoyed Urban Meyer on Fox. I really enjoyed his work with the Big Ten Network. I enjoyed a lot of the content, like the film roomy kind of stuff that they put out with him, that I thought was really good. Because I think that when you sit and you watch those videos with Urban Meyer, you get it really quickly. Like you get why his teams are so successful, and you also get why so many players wanted to play for him and loved playing for him. But my other thought about this is a man who spent 17 years as a head coach at the college level and lost 32 games. He's taking over a Jacksonville team that lost 15 games this season. Urban lost 15 games in 6 years at Florida. And we saw the way that his final season at Florida, when he went 8-5, he had to retire for health reasons, because losing that many games, not competing for a division title or SEC title, was like killing the man. And then we saw him, with the Ohio State situation, we saw the impact that the way that ended had on him there. Hell, we saw, on the sideline of that game against Maryland a few years ago, I can't remember if that was his final season or the season before, where they came back to win, but they were losing. And just watching him on the sideline, it looked like a man in intense physical pain watching his team lose. How does that guy now adapt to a lifestyle in the NFL where you don't have to win every game? Hell, you can go 7-9 and make the playoffs and win your division. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts him on a weekly basis. I'm really interested in watching it. I hope he succeeds, because as far as football coaches go, I really like Urban Meyer. And I think he's stepping into a great situation, because he's going to have Trevor Lawrence. They've got a ton of draft picks, and they've got a ton of cap room. And I think that's probably why this situation was so appealing to him, because it doesn't seem like a very long fix. If Trevor Lawrence is who everybody thinks Trevor Lawrence is, and then you combine their cap room and draft picks, this is a team that could be, competing for a playoff maybe in 2 years, maybe even next year.
But he's going to take some L's. Yeah. He's going to take a lot more losses than he's used to. And I am trying to balance being really interested and fascinated with being concerned, and also trying not to talk out of place, because I'm not his doctor, like I don't actually know how he's doing. The justification in my head, and this is purely speculation, is, well, I guess I'll ask it as a question. Do you think that removing recruiting, you still have to worry about your roster, you still have to worry about, the way that you're building it, scouting and identifying talent? And I do think Urban Meyer does a great job of identifying talent. Do you think that eliminating the recruiting, especially in the transfer portal era where you're not only recruiting the high school players, but you're constantly recruiting for transfers and recruiting your own players to get them to continue to buy in year after year, do you think that eliminating that aspect of the job, again, with the way that he recruited, that relentless, I'm going to be all about it, I'm going to be in this attitude, is that a significant portion of maybe making the stress more manageable? Like if recruiting is something you just can't even get your arms around because you're dealing with so many pieces, at least the stress of preparing for games and getting your team ready, that's something he's going to have a little bit more control of than the whole recruiting operation.
Possibly, but this is my, 1,000-mile view from Urban Meyer, because I don't know the man. This is just what I witness or what I read from him. This is a guy that, he retired for health reasons or whatever from Florida. He came back, he left Ohio State. Now he's coming back. This is a man that, to me, strikes me as somebody who wants to compete. And I think that he looked at recruiting in the same way as he looks at football games. He wanted to win. Like if he set his eyes on a player that he wanted and there were other schools competing for him, he wanted to make sure that at the end of the day, he was the guy who won the player. So I don't know I think that, not having to worry about that could be, beneficial for him. Maybe, I don't know. But I also think there's probably going to be a part of Urban Meyer that misses it. And I think that maybe that's going to be coming in free agency. But that's the thing, 'cause it's so different with free agency and recruiting. Like, if we live in a bubble where we just pretend that, players are just committing to a school based on that and blah, blah, blah. Like with a free agency, it's pretty cut and dry. How much money are you going to give me? And how much is guaranteed? With recruiting, you kind of have to do a little more sales job of convincing somebody why you're the person or that they want to come play for and go to that school and that kind of stuff. So I don't know if that's going to give him that kind of same fire, but I think that having less on the plate will probably be good for him and maybe not cause him to burn out as quickly as he's burned out at other places. But at the same time, man, like the NFL, it's not exactly, comfortable and breezy. Even if you're the head coach at Jacksonville, because you are still Urban Meyer. So the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to have Trevor Lawrence and Urban Meyer. And like, if you look across the state, that very same state, nobody really paid that much attention to Tampa Bay until what happened this year. Tom Brady comes. So now Tampa Bay is a team that is constantly in the spotlight. It's on the Monday night football games. It's on Sunday night football. Now that Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence are in Jacksonville is going to be in the national spotlight a lot more often than they're used to being. So it's still going to be a daily grind.
Great call on the competitor aspect of this. I think you're 100% on. And while you said it was your 1,000-foot sort of view of it, he did a video interview with 24/7 Sports where he was complimenting 24/7 Sports. He's like, I love, your service. I wake up, I check it every day. And I'll tell you what, man. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, I'm a competitor. If you're going to put numbers beside it, I'm going to want to be number one. Like I think you're spot on with your read on that. It's at the moment that recruiting was viewed as like wins and losses and total points and rankings, the man cannot help it. He just absolutely had to be number one. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the mailbag. This question coming from Twitter, from WDK. WDK asks, who takes an NFL job first? Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, or Jim Harbaugh?
It's weird because my initial instinct is to say Jim Harbaugh, simply because Jim Harbaugh has NFL coaching experience and like those rumors surface every single year. But I don't think Jim Harbaugh is the type of coach NFL teams are looking for these days. I think that Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley are more in line with what NFL teams want. They want the offensive savants. They want the gurus, because the NFL, it's always been a QB league, obviously, but it has really, it's not all that different from college now, where the quarterback is that important and the offense is what's important. So you want somebody who can put together an offense, who can groom a quarterback, who could develop a quarterback, and who could put points on the board. And I think that teams look at Lincoln Riley and what he's been able to do with quarterbacks at Oklahoma and the guys he's sent, to win Heisman's to the NFL, and the success that those guys are having in the NFL. And he's an obvious candidate. I think that Ryan Day, you look at what Ohio State's offense has done since he took over for Urban Meyer, he's a candidate. Jim Harbaugh's offense is at Michigan, kind of lagging behind. So I would wager that Lincoln Riley or Ryan Day are more likely than Jim Harbaugh at this point. But I say that with the caveat that I'm not as convinced that Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day are interested in the NFL as you sometimes get like that narrative. And it usually comes from, to be blunt, it usually comes from NFL media, who kind of get the sense that, well, of course they would want to leave college for the NFL. Who wouldn't want to coach in the big leagues, the real leagues? I think there's an arrogance to that doesn't always match the reality. I think that Lincoln Riley might be very happy at Oklahoma, might be very happy being a college coach. I think Ryan Day might be very happy. That's not to say that they'll never get pulled away, because, like you mentioned, we were talking about Urban Meyer, and you hear from coaches when it comes to this new era that we might be entering in with the NIL, with the transfer portal, with maybe, the one-time free transfers. It's adding a lot more to their plate that they have to deal with that they haven't had to deal with before, whereas you're no longer just recruiting the players to come to your school. You have to continue recruiting them once they're there. And then you also have to recruit other teams' players. And that's why you should probably hire general managers to run your programs. But I so maybe at some point that starts to wear on them and the NFL looks more appealing, like we were just kind of speculating there with it might be easier for Urban. But I don't know which one is the most likely, but I would say Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley, of the three, based on NFL interest, are more likely than Jim Harbaugh.
I'm going to go Ryan Day, but I agree with you. And we can go ahead and just start to look at this where Jim Harbaugh, 57 years old. I know he seems real sprightly with the way he carries himself. And I know that Nick Saban continues to push what we believed is like the age that you step out of this. But you compare him to Ryan Day at 41 and Lincoln Riley at 37. I mean, the odds, especially considering the trends you're saying, is that, Lincoln Riley and we are dealing with a closed sort of comparison here, that Lincoln Riley or Ryan Day at some point in the next 10 to 15 years, like I think Lincoln Riley will go to the NFL at some point. I just don't think he's in any hurry. And it was Barry Switzer who told him a while back, he said, you're in the mix for some of these NFL jobs. And there's a lot of coaches that would like to be in the NFL, but pretty much every coach in America would love to be the head coach of the Oklahoma Sooners. Like in terms of just a football job, Lincoln Riley has one of the best jobs. And you could make the same argument for Ryan Day, but I will pick Ryan Day and I will use that as my tiebreaker. I will use as my tiebreaker 2 years with Chip Kelly, right?
Yep.
Ryan Day was at the Eagles and he was at the 49ers with Chip Kelly. So he's at least gotten a taste of that NFL life. Lincoln Riley was coming up with Ruffin McNeil at ECU. Then, of course, he goes over offensive coordinator for Bob Stoops, takes over the program. It seemed while we are dealing with legend, national championship winning coach retires, sort of successor is brought up in both cases. It feels like the Riley connection to college football is a little bit more homegrown. Is that fair?
Yeah. But you could also counter like, Ryan Day's been to the NFL. He chose to go to college.
True. That was always like David Shaw's time in the NFL had him on the top of like a bunch of NFL lists, but he's still at Stanford.
Mm-hmm. And he's in that kind of Harbaugh position where I think NFL teams, I think David Shaw is more likely to become a general manager than an NFL head coach at this point.
Probably. All right. This question coming from the review mailbag. It's from Alex and Lily. All right. Hey, Alex and Lily. Is Ohio State dominating the Big Ten something that will continue to happen? The recruiting classes are ridiculous. I don't see how anyone will be set up in the next few years to challenge them. As a Penn State fan, how can this change?
I mean, I think you answered your own question there.
That the recruiting classes are ridiculous and you need to be able to be recruiting on their level if you want to be able to beat them.
Yeah. I mean, that's really it. You need to see Ohio State either slip up in recruiting and kind of get away from that model that Urban Meyer established and Ryan Day and that staff are still maintaining. And by the way, that is one thing we didn't touch on that is interesting to me about this Urban Meyer going to Jacksonville situation is how many coaches does he possibly raid from that Ohio State staff? Because a lot of the guys that are still there on Ryan Day's staff are holdovers from the Urban tenure. So it'll be interesting.
The director of player personnel and the strength coach.
Exactly. And we know our former co-host, we know about Mickey Marotti and his feelings towards that man. And if he leaves and goes, to Jacksonville, that could be an interesting impact. And that is something that I'm also going to be interested in following from this. But anyways, back to this question. Yeah, you'd either need Ohio State to slip back to the pack or somebody needs to come in and have that same kind of recruiting success, because that's what you see in the SEC. But at the same time, even though in the SEC, we have a lot of really strong recruiting schools, which to be fair are helped by being in a region with the most talent for the most part. Nobody's really like Georgia's put up all these tremendous recruiting classes, but they haven't caught up to Alabama yet.
Right.
They came close to winning a national title. LSU's put together tremendous recruiting classes and they did win a national title, but they're still capable of having down years. As we learned this year, Auburn has great recruiting classes, still capable of having down years. Alabama hasn't had a down year and Ohio State hasn't had a down year. So I don't know. It's not as simple as just say, well, you just got to recruit, because there is a lot more to it than that, but it's impossible to do it without the recruiting. And if you look around and you just see which of these Big Ten schools have the possibility to recruit like that, Michigan is one, Penn State's the other. And I know we've seen it, and it's because of the geographic footprint, and it hasn't impacted results in any way. But Maryland has shown an ability to recruit very good classes, and they've done it through different coaches. So I've always felt like Maryland is something of a sleeping giant in that regard, but it's a lot more difficult than that. So I would not expect anybody to really be on Ohio State's level in the Big Ten in the next few years. That's not to say Ohio State can't lose a Big Ten title. That's not to say somebody else can't win it. It's just you feel like if somebody else wins the title, something either went wrong at Ohio State or there was like a fluky result somewhere along the way. You know what I mean?
Well, to me, you need to be Michigan State in 2013, or you need to be Auburn in 2013 or 2017. Like, you just need to be right at that level. And then if the door opens, be ready to bust through it.
Advantage. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's frustrating. The question from Alex and Lily, they claim to be Penn State fans. Like, that is frustrating, especially when it is your division rival and somebody that you've had these epic battles with over the last several years. But even if you're just taking those L's, if you're that next team up, if you're in the New Year's Six, if you're only missing out by that one game on the Big Ten championship game, then have your team continue to be at that level so that when the door is open, when you get that win, you don't also lose to Michigan by 49 in the same season, or
exactly
49-10 or whatever. Like, just be at such a ridiculously high, consistent level. The Clemson Tigers were looking up at Florida State. They broke through in 2011, won an ACC title, but they didn't in 12, and they did not in 13, and they did not in 14, but they were the next best team in all those years. So when they finally got a chance to knock down the Noles in 15, they were already soaring at that position. So it's frustrating to think that the best way to take out Ohio State includes also losing to them maybe almost every year. But if you're winning all of your other games, then you're going to be better suited to be able to jump when the opportunity's there.
Yeah, because part of what happened with Clemson is they built a spot up to where they were the number 2 team in the ACC, and then Florida State took that step back. Florida State slipped. Jimbo Fisher left. Has not been able to recover since. They made some bad decisions, and they haven't recovered. If you look at the SEC, Nick Saban is going to retire one day. When he does, we don't know for certain that whoever takes that job is going to be able to maintain what Nick Saban did, because while you look at Alabama and you say, well, that's a blue blood program, it is. But you can't dismiss Nick Saban being one of the greatest coaches of all time and the impact that has had on the program. And you can't dismiss Urban Meyer being one of the greatest coaches of all time and the impact that had on Ohio State, which they're still kind of living with the fruits of. And we still need to see going forward whether that happens, or, like we just mentioned, if Ryan Day does leave for the NFL, and let's assume Luke Fickell comes in and takes over, do we know for a fact that Luke Fickell will be able to maintain what Ohio State is? No, I think he could, but there's no guarantee. So I know at times like this, it seems like it's impossible. It's not. It's just sometimes you got to be patient. These things are cyclical. And besides, in 3 years, it'll probably be Illinois dominating the Big Ten. So,
Bert era in the house. I like this question, even though I feel like I've got a very simple answer to it, but it is one that I've been asked a lot on radio hits this week and even into last week. So I figured I'd bring it up so we could address it here. Question from Andrew. Great podcast, beginning to be one of my favorites. Started listening to you guys back in April in the beginning of the pandemic, and you guys offered a much needed escape during those times. So thank you. You're welcome. My question is, if the CFB playoffs choose to expand, could we see a change in recruiting where we see that typical 5 4-star recruits that would normally go to the usual Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, etc. in a 14 playoff elect to go to other programs since they will have a better chance to make the playoffs in an 18 playoff? This will give themselves possibly more playing time and the option to stay at home or closer to home, effectively spreading the talent around to other programs as opposed to keeping it at a handful of schools. By the way, Danny has been a great addition.
I love how many people just sneak that in at the very end.
By the way, all those 1 stars are haters. We like Danny.
We like Danny. I mean, I think that theoretically it makes sense because we have seen that with the playoff era, the rich have gotten richer as far as the acquisition of talent because everybody wants, if you have a chance to go to a team that could win a national title, most kids, 8 or 9 out of 10 are probably going to choose that team over the team that, hey, well, maybe we can win a division. You know what I mean? Or maybe we can go to the Citrus Bowl,
Right.
So I do think that, yeah, in theory, expanding the field would help others recruit and land top talent and maybe kind of leech away from the same schools because you'd say, well, I got an opportunity. If I go to this Pac-12 school, I've got a better chance. If I go to Cincinnati, I've got a much better chance. If I go to Texas, I've got a much better chance. If I go to Wisconsin, now I can go and I can get to the playoff from there and it's closer to home and that's where I want to be. And in theory, all these things are true. It's just, I have heard so many theories like this in recent years in sports where it comes to we need more and more and more. And I don't think they've improved the sports. I think I look at the playoff and I'm fine with 4, but I also think that the playoff is kind of, I don't know. I don't enjoy college football in the playoff era as much as I did before the playoff era. I look at the games themselves at like the college, the NFL level, in baseball, in basketball, where we started with the idea of, well, of course, if we review a couple things, it's going to make the sport better because then we'll get it right and it won't be unfair. And then as that starts and you get into that, every single year it's, well, now we need to add this to be reviewable. We need more. We need to be able to review more and more and more. And do you feel like all these reviews have made your enjoyment of sports better, or has it ruined it for you?
It hasn't ruined it for me, but I just think it adds more time to the broadcast. So I'm like,
So I look at it, it's like expanding the playoff will improve all of this and it will give everybody a chance. I also feel like expanding the playoff will just make a lot more things I hate to use the word, but I feel like in general meaningless. Like, yeah, okay, more teams will have a chance to reach the playoff, but that just means that the playoff is going to become even more important because now more teams have the chance. So now more teams, the stated goal is going to be, we got to get to the playoff, and other things that I think matter or should matter will matter less and less. And we'll just get to a point where we're dealing with a 130 team sport, which again will likely expand because more, FCS schools or smaller schools will say, well, shit, we got to get into this. We can get a chance to get that money pie. So we'll see the FBS level expand and it'll just lead to more teams being ignored.
So I don't think that the college football playoff expansion will lead to more 4 and 5 stars getting spread around from those top teams because 4 and 5 stars go to teams with no shot at the playoff every year. 7, 8, even 9 SEC teams finish in the top 25 of the recruiting rankings. And all 7, 8, 9 teams ain't going to the college football playoff. Like Nebraska has been recruiting at kind of a high level. South Carolina recruits at a high level. So I just think that the examples of players that are outside of the college football playoff picture, the teams outside of the college football playoff picture being able to land, and they're not landing multiple 5 stars down where I'm talking about in that sort of like 20 to 35 range, but they are landing 4 stars. They are getting blue chip prospects. I mean, you don't go to South Carolina really thinking you're going to go be part of the college football playoff picture. You go probably because it'll help you get to the NFL because it's an SEC team. It's going to be a good fit, maybe because you're from the area and maybe you've got a relationship with the assistant coach. Like, sure, playing for a national championship is something that is sold at Alabama, at Ohio State, at Georgia, at Clemson. But I also think that there's a lot of 4 and 5 stars that end up going to schools that are not part of the national championship picture. Like, I mean, even Oregon, right? Like, Oregon's selling like, we're going to go to the playoff and we're going to compete for a national championship. But if we expand to 8, does Oregon get more or less 4 stars or 5 stars? I don't think so. Oregon recruits at like a top 10 level anyway, or 10 to 15 level anyway, whether they are in the Pac-12, which hasn't put a team in the playoff in years, or whether it's an 8-team playoff or the Pac-12 having an automatic bid. I just think that from the recruiting perspective, there's only but so many scholarships, and those teams at the top are going to be competing for the same amount, whether or not there's more teams in the playoff or not.
Yeah. And I think, again, geography will always play a huge role in it. Even as national as recruiting gets, most kids, if they have the opportunity, are going to want to stay closer to home. So like just being in the SEC or the ACC, where a lot of that 4 and 5-star talent is found, they're always going to have an inherent advantage in landing those kids, whether there's 8 teams, 16 teams, 32 teams, however many teams. So yeah, I think that the thought behind the theory that it would help is if the Wisconsins of the world and, the Cincinnatis and the South Carolinas and, maybe like the Iowa States or, the Utahs, if there's more availability for them to get into the playoff, it puts them in the spotlight more, which might make them more attractive to some highly rated recruits that they might not have even considered before. But I don't know how impactful it would be.
We're going to end up talking expansion all off season in these mailbags.
Yeah, it's going to suck.
There's one aspect, and I'll go ahead and just mention it here before we hit the break. But I think the idea of a bid thief would make conference championship Saturday better. That would be interesting or intriguing if we had an 18 playoff with 5 automatic bids, 1 group of 5 spot, 2 at-larges. The idea that those bubble teams, the same way that they do coming up to Selection Sunday in basketball, are like dialed into this conference that they don't care about and rooting so hard for, one team or the other to win so that they can get a better shot. I think that from a national interest perspective, that carries, because this conference championship Saturday did not have much drama. Kind of felt like we knew exactly what was going to happen because it was just going to come down to how bad did Notre Dame lose and was it bad enough that Texas A&M is going to get in there. The intrigue being stripped away from the most part from the other games. I thought that was one thing that could be exciting. And of course, those conferences would love to have more interest in those cash grabs. Championship games that they hold every year. So I could see that. Like that, I'm having to come around and like give myself reasons to get excited about it or something good to look at because I had been anti-expansion for so long, and now I just kind of feel like it's inevitable.
Yeah, and that's what it boils down to. Like you mentioned the drama and the national interest. It's like, do you want your national champion to be the actual best team in the country, or do you just want to be entertained? And I think that the best argument for expansion is I just want to be entertained.
True. Coming up on the other side, who is going to be the next non-Bama team to win the SEC West? And we will hear from Vanderbilt's new general manager, Barton Simmons, next. This next question comes from Hank from Long Island.
Hey,
that was not a Long Island accent. I just wanted to put a lot of emphasis on Hank because I like that name. All right, Hank. Big fan. Hey guys, big fan of the pod. Thanks for being the highlight of my commute and more recently the highlight of my working from bed in the morning. With 3 Georgia homers and now a Knoll, what can we expect to balance the Gator hating? Will one of you convert or will there be a new addition? What is Tebow up to these days? It's great to be a Florida Gator, Tom. In all seriousness, my question is, who will be the next non-Bama SEC West team to play in the SEC championship?
God, I don't know. I feel like if we look at this, or we approach this from the aspect of maybe there is a drop off for Alabama next year, because as we talked about earlier this week, they do lose a lot. And there are some, we're assuming a lot, and they're safer assumptions than most because we've seen Alabama replace all these guys year after year and still be really good. But let's just say that Alabama does slip. I think that in 2021, the team that's best suited to do it is A&M. But even A&M has question marks because they're replacing Kellen Mond. And as we've discussed, none of us are huge Kellen Mond fans. We don't think he's great. We think he was perfectly fine. So you could make the argument that A&M will upgrade at quarterback next year, and with their defense and with the skill that they have elsewhere on that offense, that they will be well suited to take over. It's just their quarterback next year is also going to be young and inexperienced and might not be great. So I feel like in the short term, it's Texas A&M. I feel like if we take a long-term approach, it's still got to be the team that just won the national title 2 years ago.
LSU.
Yeah. So I feel like there's still plenty of talent there. I think that Auburn has that shot in the Bryan Harsin, but with a new coach, I don't know if Bryan Harsin's going to hit the ground running and Auburn's going to be looking great. And then I think dark horse, Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Lane, you can't deny that Lane can recruit. You can't deny that offense was very potent. And if at any point he shows an interest in defense, or at least improves that defense, that's a team with a coach that you feel like, all right, that's one of those teams that could jump up and get the West in a year. That's the kind of team that could take advantage of a slip up at the top. But I think if we're just looking at next year, I would say A&M's in the best position. And if that quarterback develops, whoever it ends up being, and Jimbo starts really finding something there, I think that they have recruited at a level where Texas A&M is a very good choice to take here. But I just think that LSU is probably the smarter choice, I guess. I don't know. I feel like it's so weird to just try to imagine Alabama not winning the SEC West, even though it happens. It feels like a dumb bet to make.
Well, all right. So I think that Texas A&M is the pick because that was always the plan. You're mentioning, and I look at Jimbo Fisher's contract. They gave him that contract hoping that Nick Saban retires, and Jimbo Fisher's been spending 5 years, 6, like however many years, or like whenever that happens, even if Nick Saban doesn't retire, but there's like a little bit of a drop off or a little bit of a slip up, you gave Jimbo Fisher that deal with the idea that he would be the most well-positioned coach in the SEC to go make a run at Saban when it happens. And given the way that he's recruited, given the way that, as we mentioned earlier in the week, the sophomore class has really been a huge part of this. That's why there's a lot of excitement going into next year with Texas A&M. I do think Texas A&M's the play, but I love that you mentioned Ole Miss, because as I went through my own thought experiment in preparation for this, I was thinking, all right, well, what record wins the West? Because the question wasn't who wins the SEC championship. It's who from the SEC West is playing for the SEC championship. Listen, 5-3 with the right tiebreakers, that can get Lane into the SEC championship, right? Like if
that's the thing, like you have to assume if Alabama's not winning the division, Ole Miss was probably one of the teams that beat it, just because like matchup wise, Ole Miss has shown the capability that it could, put up points.
They've done it twice.
Yeah.
Ole Miss has beat them twice. No, and without a doubt. And there was the year that, what was it? Ole Miss, because it had the head-to-head win against Alabama, was in the driver's seat for the SEC West, and then Arkansas completed, 4th and 20 or something ridiculous like that to be able to edge out a win and give Ole Miss the extra loss it needed. If we have a year of parity, then without a doubt, your wild card and your dark horse has to be Ole Miss, because that's not a team that I think is going to go 8-0 under Lane Kiffin. But they'll get to 6-2. Like they'll run off a 5-3 or a 6-2. And if 5-3 and 6-2 is good enough to be able to win the division, then yeah, it could be. But I do think that Texas A&M, as we just saw, seems well positioned to be able to be 7-1 or maybe even 8-0 under Jimbo Fisher.
Yeah, maybe that's the way we frame it. In a natural order way, Texas A&M is the choice. In a chaos way, Ole Miss is the choice.
I cannot help but have my answer be a little bit influenced by this question. Kind of fascinating perspective from Mason. Mason says, great pod. I have a few comments I think are worth y'all's time. I'm a longtime Georgia fan that has been in Boise, Idaho for 12 years. Whew. Tell me why Auburn didn't make a huge all caps mistake hiring Harsin. The culture at BSU was set up by Coach Pete. While Harsin didn't do anything to destroy that culture, he didn't elevate the program either. You can argue Boise State has been less disciplined and the recruiting hasn't improved at all. How is Harsin going to recruit in the SEC with a program that needs a boost when he barely kept Boise State afloat? The wins may still be there, but no one inside the Boise State program is too upset that he is leaving. The Boise State faithful are already hoping for Kellen Moore. This question was submitted on December 22nd, to come in and take the reins. Thoughts?
Well, I'm not that tied into the Boise department as you are, apparently, but I just feel like, okay, maybe Bryan Harsin didn't improve on what Chris Peterson did at Boise. Maybe he just kind of maintained it. But is it not logical to argue that there's a ceiling as to what Boise can do in the Mountain West?
I kind of disagree. Again, I don't have the perspective of being this Georgia football fan in Boise. And again, Mason, thank you for your question. I'm glad you love the podcast. But wow, scorched earth on Harsin. What's up with that?
Yeah, that's kind of confusing to me too. Like, I understand that you didn't win a Fiesta Bowl and beat Oklahoma with a Statue of Liberty under Bryan Harsin, but I feel like he did a pretty damn good job.
And listen, you and I watch a lot of Mountain West football. Mm-hmm. You know, it's on the mothership CBS Sports Network. Games available to stream through your app. All you got to do is log in through your cable provider. And I feel like I watched high level football. Like, I thought that they were very efficient. I always thought that they were head and shoulders like better than the opposing team. Like, for example, just 45-8 in conference play. When they played against similar talent, they went like 5-0, 8-0, 7-1, 7-1, 7-1. They did have 1 5-3 year in 15, 6-2, 7-1, 4 top 25 finishes. I don't know, man. I've got to do some investigating now, because I thought that the hire of Bryan Harsin was a good hire. You know, I was like, okay, you made a good hire. You made a good football coach. We've got all these questions about the other stuff, and recruiting certainly falls into that. But I think that Bryan Harsin coached Boise State teams looked really good on Saturdays.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting is I do wonder, we've talked about this already, though. It's the recruiting aspect will be interesting to me, because it's different recruiting at Boise State than it's going to be at Auburn as compared to what you have to do. I also wonder, because like you mentioned, watching a lot of Boise State football over the years, like, they were clearly better than their competition most of the time. That advantage will not exist at Auburn, where you're not going to be better than the team you're playing every single week for the most part. In fact, a lot of weeks, the other team's going to have more talent than you and be better than you are, and you're going to have to figure out a way to beat them while having less talent. I don't know how often Bryan Harsin has had to do that while at Boise State. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, like you said, the scorched earth policy on Harsin, that's kind of weird to me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you and I, we're not in Boise. Maybe there is more of this there behind the scenes that we weren't aware of, but I don't know. I feel like this is kind of like a jilted lover more than anything. Like, you know, you're just trying to come up with, it's not that big of a deal. I can do better.
I just think that it has inspired me to do a little bit more digging, you know, and it's, I'm not going to let Mason's one mailbag question influence how I consider Auburn going into the SEC West, but I've got a couple months to actually make those declarations and decisions. And I don't know. I mean, so they've got Derek Mason hired as defensive coordinator. We've got who's the OC?
It's Mike Bobo, isn't it?
Mike Bobo. Tracy Rocker just left South Carolina to go be a part of it. Yeah, I don't know. That seems like a lot of that is kind of big 7-5 energy right there.
That's a lot of, I mean, that's 3 head coaches though. Like, at your head coach and your 2 coordinator positions, that's 1 current head coach, 2 former head coaches. I think that's a solid staff.
Solid staff. Yeah, we'll have to dig into it. All right. You can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fernelli. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Tom, thank you very much.
Anchor down.